concerning the history of Les Cousins, I know that 49 Greek Street, which is where it was a skiffle seller run by Hilda Sims in 1957. I don't know how long that lasted, but I do know that in the early 60s, Lucas Matheou bought the lease on the ground floor and the basement, and then it belonged to Oxford Dairies. He went about converting both floors into a restaurant and a store and a kitchen, but it proved too large, so he was looking for something to do with the basement. And I can only assume that one of the clientele who came into the restaurant, which was French cuisine, it was called Soho Grill, was a guy called Phil. I imagine he was a public school boy. I know he drove a sports car, and he must have thought it was a good idea to open a discotheque, because at the time discotheques were all the rage. We had Le Kilt and La Poubelle over the road. He thought it was a good idea to call it Les Cousins, after the Claude Chabrol film. So that was another French name, and they opened it in October 1964, and the first card I have about it says Club Continental. And it was unlicensed, I know that. They sold drinks called Mickey's and Coca-Cola and coffee. But it didn't really happen well. Andy went down to oversee it because his dad was worried about how it was going. Andy took over, Phil left, and he started to book people that he liked. And of course the whole thing just took off. There was a huge explosion then. Well, a lot of people thought it was the guy's name. They thought Andy was Les Cousins. And of course, typically English people didn't really know how to say Les Cousins, or they didn't want to, and a lot of people referred to it as the cousins. Bert always referred to it as the cousins, but between us we just said cousins. That was the easiest thing. Well, many people came down. Some of the names are Alexis Corner, who played very regularly there. Jimi Hendrix came down one night and did a set. It's reputed Bob Dylan came down to jam one night. But then there were people who were regulars like Davy Graham, Bert Yance, John Remborn, Sandy Denny, who was Bert Yance's girlfriend for a while. And of course Paul Simon started down there, and in fact Donovan played down there. And he did a big spread in one of the tabloids at one point, that Donovan digs Les Cousins. And after that the queues were around the block. I mean, everybody then wanted to come down to Cousins. What I would like to say is that we always hear about all the singers and songwriters and people who became famous, but I'd just like to underscore what contribution the Matheou family made, because without Lucas and Margaret really providing a home base for a lot of people, it wouldn't have been Cousins in the way that it was. And the fact that we had this little flat round the corner in Frith Street where no end of people would come back to spend night after night talking about the world and putting it right and what the meaning of life was and all that stuff that you did when you were young. And they would often stay and get fed, and it was part of that family's generosity that made the club what it was. So it's nice to honour them, along with all the other beautiful music that came out of it.